Hello, everybody. I am Charlotte Greene, and welcome to the What's Sexy About Sex panel. We're excited to have you guys join us for these sessions. So I'm going to get things rolling here with some introductions and questions for the panel. The audience, once again, I really encourage you to use the Q&A function to ask these lovely people any of those salacious, lascivious, flirty questions you have for the panel as a whole, as well as any specific questions you have for individual authors. I'll ask those as they come up in the Q&A, and I'll pause and prompt you guys a couple of times. And I'd love to see as many questions as possible from you gorgeous, wonderful audience members. So, okay, panel, I wanted to begin by asking you guys to give a short introduction after I call you out by name. So just tell us a little about you, about your books overall, and maybe about a recent book you have out too. So I'd like to begin with Anne.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anne Shade. I have written 2 books under Bold Strokes. My first was Femme Tales, was that. And my most recent one, or current upcoming release, which will be February 1st, is the one behind me, Masquerade. I live in New Jersey and just love being here, and that's about it. Nothing exciting.
Thank you, Anne. Georgia, if you could go next.
Hello, my name is Georgia Beers. I write traditional contemporary romance. I have been for a long time. My current book that you can get is 16 Steps to Forever. This is my 27th book. And the book that I am currently writing right now is The Big 3-0. So I'm kind of proud about that.
Very awesome. All right. Renee.
I'm Renee Roman. I live in upstate New York. My most recent publication that's out is Bonded Love, as a contemporary romance. I write lesbian romance, intrigue, and erotica. And my February release is, I don't have an actual book yet, called Body Language. And it is about a woman who struggles with her own image of herself, and the love that she finds through a connection that she makes totally unexpectedly.
It's a great
Isn't that the way we all love to make connections?
A great title, Body Language. I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, M.A.
Hi, I'm Michelle Binfield, M.A. Binfield. I am joining you from the UK, slap bang in the middle of England. This is my book that came out in December, I think. Second book with Bold Strokes. I've just finished my third, which is really exciting. I write romance, contemporary romance. I believe they would be called slow burn, kind of angsty. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Thank you. Nicole?
Yeah, I'm Nicole Disney. I'm from Denver, Colorado. I've got 4 books out with Bold Strokes. I mostly do contemporary romance and romantic suspense. And my new release is called The Clinch. And this one is like a contemporary sports romance, sports rivalry, enemies to lovers type of book. So yeah, super excited.
Thank you. And last but not least, Sandy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Lowe. I'm better known as the senior editor at Bold Strokes Books, but I do write erotic romances. This is my latest release. If You Dare, it was out in December. That's me.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I love seeing covers of all the wonderful artists that we have at Bold Strokes doing those great covers. Awesome. All right. So get us started. I'm gonna have a pretty easy one, guys, to get us rolling, and we'll get more and more flirty as we go along. So first question, and I'll again go around our little circle here. Do you like writing sex scenes? And kind of related to this, how easy, hard do you find it to write them? So sorry, let's start again with Anna.
Sometimes I like writing sex scenes. Other times it's difficult because I'm trying not to make it the same sex scene over again. So it depends on the stories and the characters. But most of the time I guess I enjoy it.
Great. Thank you. And Georgia?
I have a love-hate relationship with writing sex scenes. I'm trying to think of how to verbalize this well. I mean, I do know that when I'm writing a sex scene, I write a lot slower. So my word count, generally, if it's sex scene day, which is how I refer to it, the word goal count goes out the window because I know that I either won't get there, or if I try to get there, I'm going to stress myself out. I feel like I just take my time a little more because I want it to be just right. But also it depends on, like sex scene day, if I sit down at 9 o'clock in the morning and I have to write a sex scene, sometimes it's not so easy. But if it's later and I can have a glass of wine without feeling guilty about that, because 9 o'clock in the morning wine, a little frowned upon. So
5 o'clock somewhere.
5 o'clock somewhere.
It's 11 a.m.
it does help. It also depends on how I'm feeling about the book at the time. I've been doing this for a long time, but I still do this with, I still have days where I sit down and I open up what I'm working on and I think I'm just god awful at what I do, and why did I ever think I could be a writer? If I'm having one of those days, and sometimes I'll just step away and I won't write it today. But if I'm feeling good about the book and the direction that it's going, and I'm feeling fairly confident about my own ability, then I can usually, forgive the pun, bang it out pretty quickly.
Renee, how about you?
It really does depend on my characters and the reason that they're having sex. Sometimes it's just hot, lustful, I got to do this kind of thing, and that kind of flows easily more than when they're in the middle of the act and they're thinking about a million other things and why maybe they shouldn't be doing this. That takes time. And sometimes I get stalled in that. And then I get up and walk away and do something mundane like dishes or cook or.
Great. Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, I kind of like them actually. Yeah, I think I like them more when I thought no one would ever read them. But now they're a little more challenging. I think the first time my first book, I haven't written many. I just didn't imagine anyone would read it, so I sort of ran a bit riot. It was kind of fun. And then when I imagined people reading them, I think it made me a little more self-conscious probably. But yeah, I kind of enjoy them. They are slower. I hadn't really thought about it until Georgia said it. You do slow down, definitely. It's like choreography, isn't it, in some odd kind of way. But I enjoy them. I have to stop myself putting more of them in. I'm never quite sure what the line is between the kind of books that I write and what's expected and tipping into something you shouldn't. So yeah, maybe they'll get old. I'm only on book 3. Maybe I'll enjoy them forever. But for now, I kind of like them. Yeah.
Great. Nicole?
Yeah, I actually enjoy writing them as well. I agree with everyone else that it's slower and it's kind of a different process, and that you're probably going to dedicate a day to it. And kind of like Georgia said, it's sex scene day, right? So it's got its own like template for how your writing ritual is going to be, and it's probably a little different because I'll take a lot of time before I write it, just thinking about it, maybe reading some chapters up to it. I can't just 9 o'clock in the morning write a sex scene out of the blue. But yeah, I do enjoy it though. I just, like everybody said, slow it down and just kind of make a day of it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And Sandy?
I love writing them. I can write them anywhere, anytime. I can write them in airports, on planes, at my parents' house. Very strange. But I do agree with Renee that when you're writing erotic romance, especially, and you have a lot of scenes that occur between the same characters, they get harder the further into the book that you are, because they get deeper and more complex and there's more things to work in. So the earlier ones often are the most fun to write.
Thank you. And we have a question from the audience. Nancy Wheelton asks, where does your inspiration come from? That's actually one of my questions later. That's great. Thanks, Nancy. Where does your inspiration come from to write a sex scene? Wink, she says. So let's switch up the order and go backwards, if you don't mind. So, Sandy, let's start with you. Where's, you say you're at your parents', where?
Oh, I don't know. This is gonna sound weird, but I feel like I don't need a whole lot of inspiration. It's already there. Yeah, I guess that's just my, I don't know, my personality, my way of seeing the world. I think sometimes what I read will inspire me. So I often read a lot of nonfiction books about sex and relationships and whatnot. And I'll read something that is interesting or different or makes me think. And I'll try to find a way to work that into a book. But in terms of just in general, I think for whatever reason, who I am and how I think, mostly it's already there.
It's in there waiting for you. Nicole?
I think I take most of my inspiration from the characters, possibly the setting, because who they are as people is probably gonna inform the type of sex they're having. If they're super reserved or if maybe they're a little bit crazier or whatever, it's gonna, their personalities are gonna play into it. Where they are in their relationship is gonna play into it. Where they are physically is probably gonna play into it. So typically just the way the story has happened up until that point does a lot of the work for me as far as how it's gonna happen.
Yeah, I was sort of nodding. I agree in a way. Yeah, I think if characters have been waiting for many chapters, and then the kind of sex they have is just much more reflects that, I suppose, the fact that they've not just met and this has been a long time coming, for one of them. But I think also just life. I mean, my life, films I watch, books I read. I was not other people, obviously I'm not watching other people having sex, that sounds weird, but the conversations I might have had with other people. So a whole range of things. Some of it sticks in your mind because it just, I don't know, you just thought it was cool, and you know, the chance to include it in some way in a scene, you just think, oh yeah, I've always wanted to do that, or I remember that, and that was really cool. So all the time, it makes me sound like I think about sex all the time. I don't. I used to not. I think about other things. But yeah, there's a lot of it out there to be inspired by.
Renee, do you have a point of inspiration?
It's my characters. Sometimes they fight against the urge and sometimes they don't. And whatever mood they're in, I tend to go with it. I don't really plan out when a sex scene is going to happen. I let it kind of come organically, so to speak.
Yes,
and just work through it. And if they're just out to have a good time, I let them have a good time. And if they're worried about the consequences, I kind of try to work that into, doesn't stop them, of course, but it might interrupt the mood a little bit. And to get them back into that is kind of fun.
How about you, Georgia?
I would have to echo both Nicole and Renee in that it does depend on the characters a little bit, but I'm the boss, so I tell them when they're having sex. I don't wait for them to decide when they're having sex. I can say that inspiration-wise, this is going to sound weird, but if I think of a situation or a hot location or something and think, well, that would be sexy, I'll either jot it in my notes in my phone or I'll remember it in the back of my head to put in a book at some point. And then the other thing that I have to remember and then I have to think about after you've written as many books as I have is, have I done that before? If it's going to be a little crazy, like, well, it's not so crazy, but, sex on the kitchen counter. Have I done that before? Because you can only do that in so many books before your readers are going, they always have sex on the kitchen counter. What is that? So you got to be careful of that type of thing. But also, as Michelle said, TV and movies, shows and movies. If I see something that I think is hot, I'll jot it down and I'll remember it for later and I'll use it. I mean, steal like an artist, isn't that what they say? So I'll use it. I'll find it and use it and stick it in a book somewhere. Inspiration really comes from everywhere.
We all want to buy that notebook you have now or steal it. How much would it be worth? I'm thinking quite a lot.
It's got sketches.
Yeah.
My inspiration comes from the characters as well, where they're leading me, their relationship. If I think I'm also like Georgia, where if I think they're ready, even though they seem like they may be ready, and I don't think it's that time, then, I kind of hold off and, give them a little teasing moment, but not quite go there. Inspiration comes from music. My father was a huge music person and instilled it in me. So my moods are like music. So there's one particular artist, B. Steadwell, that's very sensual. She's a queer artist. And I listen to her every time. If I feel like I'm not in the headspace to do a sex scene, I just turn her on and I'm ready to go.
Turns you on, huh?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you all. All right, another question from an audience member, Lindsay Knack. Do you approach writing a sex scene differently depending on the type of book? So, for example, erotica versus suspense thriller versus contemporary romance.
Sure. So I've only written erotic romance novels, but I have written short stories. And I do find that there is a difference. I think short stories, you can be a little more daring. Sometimes you can incorporate elements that maybe wouldn't work so well in a novel. I just wrote a short story about a couple that had already broken up. They were exes, and they weren't able to kind of separate themselves enough, and their sexual connection was hotter after they had broken up because they didn't have all the baggage of their relationship. And that kind of concept works really well in the short, fast pace of a short story, but I don't think would make such a great novel because it's kind of darker and it's not romantic. So for me, that's a big difference.
Great. How about you, Nicole?
So I've written contemporary romance and like a thriller, and then the sports romance are kind of the three sort of different genres I write among, and they're not terribly different for me. I pretty much approach it the same way. I know I would approach it differently if I was doing erotica, definitely, but in my genres, I think the only difference really that I would note is that in the contemporary romance, I probably am just a little bit more careful about making sure I'm really nailing it time-wise, because that is the driving force of the story. And you don't want to do that at the right time and lose tension, things like that. In something like a thriller, you have multiple things that are keeping the story moving forward. So I think maybe just an extra dose of paranoia on contemporary romance, but pretty much the same.
Michelle?
I mean, I've only written contemporary romance, not erotica or suspense. So, I mean, I have lots of, like, I suppose things that I've written that I haven't published or tried to make into a book. And I think it's true that I had a really great sex scene in the first book that I had to lose completely because it wasn't appropriate, in inverted commas. And I sort of would love to go back to it. I suppose that there's sort of things that you can write outside the confines of a contemporary romance where, you know, people are a bit more angry or bitter or destructive, and that actually makes really good sex sometimes and good sex scenes. So I sort of enjoy that, but I haven't had a chance to put it in any of the books because it's not really fitted. So maybe there's a book in there with that kind of sex for me in the future. I don't know, but it is different. It's like not as loving, is it? It can be angry sex, as Sandy said, that sort of destructive post-breakup sex and that kind of thing. I think they're fun to write and easier to write in a way because you don't have to be quite so careful about the emotions. So I quite enjoy them. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I'm sure you can keep a journal going like George Beard. Renee?
Like Sandy said, I think that you can definitely be edgier with short stories. I have a short story called Hard Body, and the first scene has the main character in a compromising position, pleasuring herself, and is caught. And I don't think that would work so well in a contemporary romance right on the first page. But you kind of have to get there quick in a short story, pardon the pun. So you can't drag your feet about getting the heat and the emotion and the attraction on the table right away. That's how I like to read an erotic short story. So that's how I write them.
Great. Georgia.
Well, I haven't written erotica in a very long time, and I wrote it many, many years ago. But what I do think is that your approach, you can get away with different language in erotica. And, you know, Renee used the term edgier. I agree with that. You could be, and I don't want to say that erotica is raunchy, but you can be raunchier. Not that you can't in traditional contemporary romance, but I think you can, forgive the pun, go a little deeper in erotica, and get away with some things. I know. I can't.
I can't.
I'm gonna be so red before this is over. I think that there are things that you can get away with in erotica that you, not that you can't get away with it in contemporary romance, but you might not want to go there.
Great. And Anne.
My first book, Femme Tales, wasn't originally supposed to be erotica. It was just supposed to be 3 short novella romances. But the sex scenes and the characters were a bit more graphic than what you would find in general romantic fiction. So
that's the word.
Yes. Especially the first story, Beast, because, you know, the character is beastly, so it's more of it's a hot, you know, manic, you know, kind of, it's a little more graphic than what you usually find. Masquerade is there is some hotness in it because the character is going through a couple of things, but it's not there's more romantic love and romantic sex than there is, I guess, graphic sex. Although there is a point where graphic sex is in there, but it's not like the mainstay. But for some reason, I think it was easier for me to write it in Femme Tales than it is in this one. I don't know if it's because of the time period. This takes place during the 1920s. And I'm sure there was graphic sex in the 1920s. But because Femme Tales is contemporary, it felt easier writing a little more graphic sex in that than it did in this one.
Thanks, everybody. This next question from another audience member. This is Ann Hart. What is it like when your characters talk to you in general, or when it's sexy time? So I guess, is there a difference between the two? I think is the idea there. And let's accept the order up again a little bit and begin with Michelle.
Put me out there. I was muted, sorry. I don't know. I think, if I understand the question correctly, I think my characters are much less talkative when it's sexy time. It's an obvious thing to say, maybe, but they don't have a lot to say. You know, I don't know what that says about me, but they're not talkative when they're having sex. So it's, in that sense, they're having sex and they're not talking. They're telling me what they want, obviously. I'm trying to do my best to give it to them, but they're not really. They don't have as much to say. I think. I think in terms of when it happens, and I think I feel very in charge of that in a way, so I can sort of put them off. You know, if I always find a reason why it's not time for them to have it, there'll be some misstep or something that will happen that means it can't happen, even if they really, really want it. So I'm a bit mean in that way, but yeah, they're definitely less articulate, for sure. Yeah.
How about you, Renee?
If I'm writing contemporary romance, I think that there's more angst or hesitation before they actually have sex. I think that there's a lot more mental involved than in an erotic romance, because it's the sex that drives the story. So if you wait 80 pages, I think that that's not necessarily going to work out to your advantage. But I think if you are in a contemporary romance and you're on page 10 and they're having sex, I don't know if that's the right place either. I think that it has to be more of a head game in a contemporary romance, and that's how I write them.
Great. How about you, Sandy? What do you think?
My characters don't talk to me the way that other authors describe it. Sometimes I will sit down and think about them and how to write them well, but I don't get like the back and forth that a lot of authors talk about. But in terms of what I write, I cannot get them to shut up. In the previous panel, one of the authors said that her pet peeve was that she hated when characters talk too much during sex scenes. I was like, oh no, I do that all the time. My sex scenes are like 30,000 words because they're literally always talking. So for me, I find it sexy. It's a big part of the way that I write sex scenes. It's a big part of their connection and their communication during sex. So on that element, talking plays a big role, but not kind of in my own head, as if my characters are outside of me.
Anne.
My characters do talk to me, a little too much sometimes. But when it comes to the sex scenes, I guide that. And they don't talk during the sex scenes. There may be like a little teasing word here or there, or command, someone telling someone to turn over or lie down, or, something like that. But a lot of that plays out in my own head and to put on paper, but the character in those moments, I don't hear anything from the characters other than what I need for them to say or do within that scene.
Nicole?
So my characters don't talk to me so much as they talk to each other in my head. And I guess the difference with a sex scene is just, I think talking in sex scenes is sexy as well. So I think you're right, Sandy. But yeah, it depends if I can come up with something good for them to say, though. I won't do it just to do it, but occasionally a line will pop up. I guess that's a character talking to me, and sometimes it'll make the scene. So I just take time before I write a sex scene to just kind of sit with it and see if they have anything to say and kind of go from there.
Thank you. And again, last but not least, Georgia.
I see that Anne in the Q&A clarified the question, and she is asking about your characters talking to you, and do they talk to you
Thank
differently?
you.
And I'm with Nicole and Sandy in that my characters don't really talk to me. Because again, like I said, I'm the boss. I tell them what to say, what they're going to say. But I do understand that that's how it works for a lot of people. It's just not how I operate. So they don't really, there isn't a difference between what they're saying to me in any given situation. But I will say that when I'm writing a regular scene as compared to writing a sex scene, when I'm writing a regular scene, the goal is always moving the story forward. And in the back of my mind is always what's going to happen next. Where are we going? This is leading to this chapter, which is this scene. And when I'm writing a sex scene, I'm just fully immersed in the sex scene. And I'm not thinking about, unless there's some kind of a hook or a gimmick or something's going to happen that involves that sex scene, I'm just focused on that. I'm not looking at what's coming next. More puns. Not looking at that. I'm just focused on this particular scene and getting to the end of that. And then I worry about that later. But if I'm not writing a sex scene, the rest of the book is always like in my peripheral vision.
Yeah, and thanks again for clarifying that question. All right, next question from the audience from Catherine Dines. Do you think it's taboo or a mood killer to write a sex scene that isn't perfect in romance fiction? As a reader, I think I would feel good about reading some slightly awkward moments as the couple get to know one another or have a lot of pleasure without, multiple orgasms the first time. Not necessarily bad sex the first time, but maybe awkward sex or not perfect sex. What do you guys think about it? Let's start with Michelle again.
I suppose I think the first time is awkward just because it's the first time, and especially if you're writing something angsty and slow burn and people have been waiting, two people have been waiting a long time. But I don't know. I don't want anyone getting cramp or I find it really awful. I want it to sort of be really very romantic and work, but an awkwardness, a nervousness, a sort of a not being able to express yourself. That I like to read it. I like to write it. It seems natural, but not. Yeah, I don't know if someone falls off the edge of the bed or gets cramp, or I don't know. They're just doing it for 3 hours and can't seem to make anything happen. I don't want to read that. I don't want to write it either. But I understand that sort of the perfection. The first time when two people get together. It's funny because the book that I've just written was a sort of second chance romance, the one that's out now, not this time. And that felt easier or better because these were people that knew each other's bodies really well from 5 years before when they'd had a relationship, found their way back to each other. Possibly, let me give it away. So that was sort of easier because it wasn't like a first time, although it's the first time for a while. So I liked that more. Yeah, don't know if that's the answer exactly.
Yeah. Renee, how about you?
I think if I went back and read through all of my books, I would find that I have at least one scene where the characters are laughing in bed, because that happens. And if it doesn't, I don't know, maybe I'm not doing it right. But I think that we have to enjoy the scene, not only the physical part, but the mental part. And sometimes the mental part, you get off on a tangent and you're like, where in the hell did that come from? I'm in the middle of, getting ready to have an orgasm. And I think that those are funny and natural and they belong there. So
Great.
I write whatever.
Yeah. Sandy, how about you?
So in erotic romance, the sex is the story to a large extent. And so in If You Dare that I just finished writing, there is a very significant sex scene in that book that does not end well. Nobody has an orgasm. It stops midway. There's a problem. It's super awkward and emotional and horrible. It doesn't end well. And I wrote that on purpose to propel my plot forward. It was really important for my story. So I think they absolutely can play a role in the book, but you need a reason. And they sometimes work better for erotica or for erotic romance where the sex is the story and there is more of a point, as opposed to contemporary romance where the sex is often a confirmation of characters' feelings or a confirmation of their love for each other. They tend to play different roles in different genres. But I think if you have a reason to write awkward sex or bad sex or whatever the case may be, as long as it makes sense in the story and makes sense for your characters, go for it.
I think it's natural for it to not be perfect. There are scenes where it's not a perfect love scene, but there's no, awkward moments in it. In Masquerade, there is at least a couple awkward moments. One, because it's the main character, when the main character's first time happens, she's been giving pleasure, but now it's time for her to give pleasure. She's not sure what to do. So she's in her own head thinking, okay, what do I do? How do I do this? Do I just do what they did to me, kind of thing? And then there's also, like Sandy, a moment where the sex starts, but then something happens and there's no good result to it. So I think it's natural for those things to happen, and to write a perfect love scene where, you know, someone isn't in their own head or isn't second guessing or isn't realistic.
Yeah, I would say I don't think I've ever done it. I could. I'm not against it, but I agree just that there needs to be a reason. You would have to look at what you're trying to do with that scene. And typically in contemporary romance, or what I write, or even a romantic suspense, typically by the time there's a sex scene, the point is very much about these two people finally getting together, and there's been all this tension and all this waiting. So usually my goal in that scene is for there to be this amazing connection. That said, if the goal of the scene was something else, if I was trying to kind of show somebody's insecurities or maybe knock down a character who takes themselves a little too seriously, if I had some other goal, I think you could use that. But typically in my scenes, the goal is about a really intense natural connection where the chemistry is correct and the timing is correct, and I want it to be pretty much just sexy.
Great, thank you. And Georgia?
I agree with pretty much everything that everybody said, but I am of two minds about this particular subject, because I do think that, as both Sandy and Nicole said, if you have a reason, if you have the right reason, it's okay to do a little bit of an awkward love scene. I would say a big part of the reason would be for humor, to have something humorous in there. At the same time, people read romance to escape. So I almost think that having the love scene be super awkward and not perfect and all of those things the first time with these two people is almost too realistic. And people want to get away from realism when they read romance. Or most people, many people, that's kind of the point of a romance, is escapism. Also, as Nicole said, by the time you get these two main characters together, by the time they have their first love scene, the reader is starting to understand that they are perfect for each other. They are made for each other. And so them having a really awkward love scene kind of doesn't fit that. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I don't know, if I'm writing about two people that are made for each other, it's going to be pretty close to perfect and sexy and all of those things. I guess to answer the question, I'm not against a nervous / awkward first time, but I would hesitate to write that.
Great, thanks everybody. So there was an anonymous question that was pretty similar to that one. So I am skipping over that, and I'm actually going to skip ahead and come back to one. So Isadora, I will get to your question, but I did want to kind of switch tactics just a tiny bit here with the last question our anonymous person has, which is, do you write sex scenes with props, toys, strap-ons? Is that still done, or is it old-fashioned? What do you think? So I wanted something a little bit different here, guys, and let's mix up the order a bit and begin with Nicole.
So I have not in anything I've published. I've written some short stories and things like that. And I think this kind of goes back to what some people were saying earlier about how you can kind of do more with short stories that maybe you wouldn't put in like a contemporary romance. That said, I think you certainly could. I just haven't. And I think in erotica definitely plays to that more. I've seen it done in contemporary romance too, and done well, and I liked it and everything. I guess to me, typically that doesn't happen the first time you get together necessarily. It could, but typically when I'm trying to recreate what I think would naturally happen, especially in those first experience or two, I think it's less likely that that would occur.
Yeah, so Sandy, maybe this would be almost like a counter to you. What do you think?
Sure, I'm still trying to figure out if sex toys are old-fashioned. I wrote props, toys, and If You Dare. I didn't write them in my first book, Party of Three. I thought about it, but the book is set at a party. The entire book is set in one night. And I couldn't really come up with a reason that someone would bring a sex toy to a birthday party. Just kind of a bummer. So I had to write a whole book without them because it just didn't make sense. But I think I think there are genre conventions. Toys and props and things like role play and kink and whatnot are much more common, more popular, more of a convention in erotica and erotic romance as opposed to contemporary romance or any other genre that has sex. So I think largely it depends on what kind of book you're writing, what your tone is, and what's appropriate for your characters and your timeline.
Anne, what do you think?
I did write in a sex toy in Masquerade, but it also goes along with the character. She's a very bold character. It also goes with the time period. In that time period, during the 1920s, was kind of like the original, free spirit, free for all. There were sex parties, sex scenes. There were all sorts of stuff that were going on during that period. And this particular character is the type of character that would use that. It was a strap-on, but I also did my research because I had to figure out what kind of strap-on would they have in the 1920s, and so it made for interesting research. But I think if it's called for with the character, if it's something that a character you would think that character would be into, if it's two characters that have never used them before, then all of a sudden they're whipping them out. Excuse the pun. Then I think it's kind of too much too soon and unnecessary. But with this particular character, it's something she would utilize.
Great. Yeah. Renee, how about you?
So I was trying to think while everybody else was answering, and yes to all of it. I definitely put sex toys in most of my writings. In contemporary, they tend to be later after people are more comfortable with each other and are exploring their likes and dislikes of sexuality together. In erotica, probably more often than not, but in any instance, there is always consent for me. I always write in a consent of some form. And that's just me. And it's not I don't necessarily have anything against it, but I think that if I were in that situation, in that moment, I would want the option. So that's what I write. But I have nothing against either, and I certainly hope sex toys are not old-fashioned, because if they are, I'm older than I think.
Georgia, how about you?
I tend to agree with Nicole and what Renee just said about, when I'm writing a contemporary romance, you're basically seeing the first 2, possibly 3 times these 2 people are together. And I think that the sex toys come later. So I don't want to belabor the point, but that's what I'm at.
Michelle, do you have a similar?
Yeah, the same, really. I think they're raising martinis to sex toys in the comments, which is...
They are.
I don't have one, I feel correct. But I would raise a martini if I had one. I had to stop myself from writing into this book that I've just sent to Cindy. So she would have cut it out, I'm sure, or told me to. But I got obsessed. They went to Pride on a parade on Flow, and I got obsessed with one of them buying a sex toy from the Pride stalls and taking it back to the hotel. I just couldn't make it work because they were too new together. It would have been like, the 2nd or 3rd time they'd had sex. And although I really wanted to do it, I stopped myself. It didn't feel right because it just felt too bold. I agree. It's hard when people are new together. However hot you might think it would have been, it wasn't right for the book. So I'll save the rainbow coloured dildo for a future book when it's more appropriate.
We're running a tiny bit close to the end here, so I guess this might just be kind of a flash question, because I want to make sure that we've got a chance for everybody to talk about upcoming work. So we'll just go real quick, if you can. To what extent do you think that sex scenes are supposed to mirror real life? This is from Isadora. So should it be realistic? Should it be fantasy? What what's your feelings on this? And we'll go and I think I lost track of my own order. So we'll start with Michelle since you went last on that one.
I don't know. I mean, I watched very religiously all of the L Word. So I wasn't really brought up on realistic sex scenes, I suppose. I don't know, actually. I don't know. I want, I think Georgia or someone said it, I want escapism when I'm reading from a romance. I want the sex to be wonderful. I want it to be full of emotion and passion. I don't want anything to go wrong very much. So I sort of want to write that as well. I mean, if you're lucky enough that is your sex life in real life and it's passionate and wonderful and nothing ever goes wrong, then it is realistic. If your sex life is not like that, then read a romance book and
Great. Renee, what do you think? Realistic, fun?
I think in a contemporary romance, I find that tenderness and passion go hand in hand, especially for their first meeting. And, that's real life, hopefully, unless it's a drunken flop in bed and then nobody will remember anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I think that, it's also a author's place to live out fantasies. So I think it's a combination of both. And that's okay, because we can make up anything we want and it's great. And we get away with it. Well, unless you're told no by your editor, but that's a whole other story.
All right, Georgia.
Guess I'm not sure what constitutes realistic. I mean, I write present day contemporary romance, so the love scenes are realistic to me, unless they're talking about it all being perfect, like we mentioned before, as opposed to a giant failure of a sex scene. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go with more realism than not. I don't know what I would write if I was writing an unrealistic sex scene. I'm not sure, unless what I write is unrealistic because it's generally really good. I don't know. I'm confused.
I'm on the same wavelength, Georgia.
Right? Yeah, and go ahead and jump in. What do you think?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm with Georgia. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, most people's fantasy is what they pretty much try and live out and try and do, within the bedroom. There may be some things that I've written for characters that I would love to do, but have been too chicken to do myself. But that's still realistic to me because it's something that I would do if I ever got up the nerve to do it. So I think realism is more or less where I would go with that.
Yeah, Sandy?
I think it's the author's choice. I think both can work, and it's up to the author what they are most comfortable writing. Perfect sex scenes are great, and awkward sex scenes are great, and the characters who favor a certain position because their back aches or whatever. I mean, I think any author can make any type of sex scene work as long as it's somehow relevant to your story and your characters, and serve some kind of purpose. So I think there's room for all different kinds of scenes.
And Nicole.
I think it's realistic when you take into account that these stories are about people finding the one. So this is the dream relationship. This is perfect. So yeah, the sex might seem perfect, but I do think that that's realistic if you're in that relationship. If you're in a place where you're dating, more awkwardness or bad experiences might be realistic for you right now, and this might seem more like a fantasy. So I do think it's realistic, but to the situation of having fallen deeply in love.
Well, thanks everyone to the panel. I just want to give the audience a quick heads up in 10 minutes at 7 Eastern, we have author readings with Chris Bryant, Nicole Disney, Marshall Freeman, Stephanie Lake, and Ann Shade. And just to wrap us up here today, if everybody wants to mention their upcoming book, we'll go in exactly the order that we just did. Not that I can remember. We'll start with Michelle. Sorry, your upcoming work.
I'm going to mention the title this time because I forgot the first time. Yeah, it's not this time. It's out now in paperback and ebook. Thank you.
Awesome. Renee.
Body Language will be out February 1st. It is an erotic romance about body positivity.
Awesome. Georgia.
16 Steps to Forever out right now. And in April is The Secret Poet, about a woman who is helping her brother woo the woman that she finds herself attracted to.
Anne.
Masquerade, coming out on February 1st. It's a historical romance that takes place during the 1920s Harlem Renaissance.
Great. Sandy.
If You Dare was out in December. I'm currently writing a book called The Naked Truth about a woman who is horrified by her own sexual fantasies and the woman who helps her come to terms with them.
Great. And finally, Nicole.
The Clinch is out right now, available with Bold Strokes anyway. It'll be out wide release on the 12th.
Thank you, everybody. And again, there's a sale, 15% off. There's links in the chat. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, audience.
Thank you, everyone.
Guys.
Thank you.